ask unanimous consent that Mr. Johnson, the ranking member of the Constitution Subcommittee, be allowed to participate in today's hearing, which is our customary practice for subcommittee hearings.
The gentleman makes a unanimous consent request.
Mr. Chairman, I would object.
Objection is heard. I now have the pleasure of introducing today's witnesses.
Why are we not allowing? It is customary.
Mr. Jordan, there was a unanimous consent request. Objection was heard, and now we'll introduce our witnesses.
This has never happened.
It is now my pleasure to introduce today's witnesses. Our first witness is Jeff Bezos, the Chief Executive Officer. Mr. Jordan, I have the time.
But this is the ranking member of the Constitution. We're talking about people's liberties here. We got the ranking member.
Mr. Jordan, you made a unanimous consent request. Objection was heard. Those are our rules.
Objection was.
It is now my pleasure to introduce today's witnesses.
By the Mr.
Our first witness is Jeff Bezos, the Chief Executive Officer.
The lords of Silicon Valley had been summoned yet again, only to continue their gaslighting of the American people after years of relentless bullying of small businesses, the totalitarian dominance of the public square, and aiding foreign enemies, terrorists, pedophiles, and insurrectionists. The House Subcommittee seemed ill-equipped to truly get to the bottom of the overwhelming pillaging of our Bill of Rights.
It was reported that Donald Trump Jr. got taken down for a period of time because he put something up on the efficacy of hydroxychloroquine. Now, I wouldn't take it myself, but there still is a debate on whether it is effective either in treating or preventing COVID-19. And I think that this is a legitimate matter of discussion. And it would be up to a patient and their doctor to determine whether hydroxychloroquine was the correct medication, given the circumstances. Now, why did that happen?
Congressman, well, first, to be clear, I think what you might be referring to happened on Twitter, so it's hard for me to speak to that.
But wouldn't that be up to somebody else, to say, okay, what somebody posted on this really isn't true, and here's what the facts are, rather than having a Twitter or a Facebook take it down?
On specific claims, if someone is going to go out and say that hydroxychloroquine is proven to cure COVID, when in fact it has not been proven to cure COVID, and that statement could lead people to take a drug that in some cases, some of the data suggests that it might be harmful to people, we think that we should take that down. That could cause imminent risk of harm.
While Matt Gaetz and a handful of others traversed the lies to bring a host of crimes to the forefront.
Mr. Pichai, during our prior discussion earlier today, you said that Google doesn't work with the Chinese military. That answer was deceptive because Google works with many of the entities that work with the Chinese military in common collaboration. And just as one example would be Tsinghua University, where Jeff Dean, who is the head of Google AI, served on the Computer Science Advisory Committee for the university, and then the university takes nearly $15 million from China's Central Military Commission. On December 11th, you testified to the Judiciary Committee, and in response to a question from my colleague Zoe Lofgren about search, you said, "We don't manually intervene on any particular search result." But leaked memos obtained by the Daily Caller show that that isn't true. In fact, those memos were altered December 3rd, just a week before your testimony, and they describe a deceptive news blacklist. Mr. Pichai, in 2016, there was an internal Google meeting. You attended that meeting along with Sergey Brin. A video of that meeting was leaked to Breitbart, and at the meeting, top Google executives, including Kent Walker, lamented Trump's victory. They compared Trump voters to extremists, and it was discussed that there was an intent to make the Trump win a blip in the populist movement in American history. Now, I know you've testified today in response to my questions and Mr. Jordan's questions that you don't intend this time to engage in electioneering on behalf of the former vice president. But given the video evidence of senior members of your team in your presence saying that they had the intent to make the Trump victory a blip, why should we believe that testimony today?
We respect the democratic process. We are deeply committed to it. As a company, we take pride in the information we provide to help people participate in free elections.
after your employees and top executives said in your presence that they intended to make the Trump victory a blip, what action did you take as the CEO to protect and preserve the neutrality of your platform?
2 years ago, we announced new community guidelines for within Google, clearly making it clear that employees obviously are free to have their political views, but none of that they shouldn't bring that as they work on any of our products. We would take strong enforcement action.
We have sort of a string of events here. We have the 2016 meeting where people demonstrated their intent to make changes to hurt the president. Then we have your testimony today that's a little different than your testimony from December, where you say people can manipulate blacklists. And then you have the outcome where sites like Breitbart and Gateway Pundit and others see that disparate treatment. So it really doesn't take Sherlock Holmes here to connect the dots and see what Google's doing. Mr. Bezos, I am deeply moved by your personal story. I am not here accusing you as someone who would ever traffic in hate, but it seems you have empowered people who do. And I'm particularly talking about the Southern Poverty Law Center. The Southern Poverty Law Center, which you allow to dictate who can receive donations on your Amazon Smile platform, have said the Catholic Family News, Catholic Family Ministries, the Federation for American Immigration Reform, the American Family Association, the Family Research Council, the Jewish Defense League, and even Dr. Ben Carson are extremists and should be treated differently. Dr. Carson is on the cabinet and is one of the most renowned minds in America. I'm just wondering why you would place your confidence in a group that seems to be so out of step and seems to take mainstream Christian doctrine and label it as hate.
We use the Southern Poverty Law Center data to say which charities are extremist organizations. We also use the U.S. Foreign Asset Office to do the same thing.
But
those
why?
two together.
Since they're calling the Catholics and these Jewish groups hateful groups, why would you trust them?
Sir, I'm going to acknowledge this is an imperfect system, and
no doubt.
I would love suggestions on better or additional sources.
My suggestion would be a divorce from the SPLC.
And there are news reports that law enforcement has made increasing use of what are called geofence warrants. And these geofence warrants allow authorities to compel technology companies to disclose location records for any device in a certain area at a particular time. Court filings suggest that Google received a 1,500% increase in geofence requests from 2017 to 2018, and a 500% increase from 2018 till 2019. The Fourth Amendment requires probable cause and specificity, and that's not what these are. These warrants are essentially for any person in an area at a particular time, and geofence warrants require neither. So unless accompanied by particularized information and identifying a subject, geo warrants are essentially general warrants. I believe that the location information should be considered as contents of the Electronic Communications Act under the Stored Communications Act. Do you agree?
And we recently made a change by which we automatically delete location activity after a certain period of time by default for our users. So we are happy to engage with your office, Congressman, and
I'm using you because these are going on in Virginia and New York, I think, right now. But I mean, this equates for everything. I think people would be terrified to know that law enforcement could grab general warrants and get everybody's information anywhere.
Several months ago, my wife called and said, hey, there's a good article on the Gateway Pundit that you should read. So out of curiosity, I was up here in Washington. Out of curiosity, I Googled Gateway Pundit. And it didn't show up on the first page, didn't show up on the second page. There was a bunch of different blogging sites about how there were disagreements with what was on the Gateway Pundit. But I actually had to type in gatewaypundit.com to get to it. Interestingly, Google didn't allow me to get to the actual website. That was a couple of months ago, before this hearing was set to be heard, before this hearing was noticed, before you knew that you would be appearing before us today, and that this is an issue that obviously conservatives and Republicans have had. Last week, after this was noticed, this hearing was noticed, I did the exact same thing here in the Capitol. And wouldn't you know it, I Googled Gateway Pundit, and that was the very first website that came up.
I believe on our platforms, including YouTube, there are more conservative voices than ever before, and we believe in freedom of expression.
If Facebook is out there trying to repress conservative speech, they're doing a terrible job at it. And so I don't understand just the endless whining about how Facebook and Twitter, or Facebook and Twitter are somehow discriminating against conservatives.
Yesterday I was sent a YouTube video about doctors discussing hydrochloroquine and discussing the not dangers of children returning to school. And when I clicked on the link, it was taken down. And then I was sent a different link on YouTube and it was taken down. I just checked again just to make sure. And it says that this video has been removed for violating YouTube's community guidelines. How can doctors giving their opinion on a drug that they think is effective for the treatment of COVID-19 and doctors who think it's appropriate for children to return back to school violate YouTube's community guidelines when all of these videos of violence is all posted on YouTube?
In the area during a pandemic, we look to local health authorities. So for example, in the US, it would be CDC for guidelines around medical misinformation in a narrow way, which could cause harm in the real world.
It's free expression of speech, and you have these doctors who are giving their opinion as doctors, and I don't understand why YouTube and therefore Google thinks it's appropriate to silence physicians and their opinion of what can help and cure people with COVID-19. Is there an ideological diversity amongst the content moderators?
Congressman, I don't think we choose to hire them on the basis of an ideology. They're hired all over the world. There's certainly a bunch in the U.S. There's diversity in where they're hired, but certainly we don't want to have any bias in what we do, and we wouldn't tolerate it if we discovered that.
So you don't specifically hire, say, conservative moderators and Democrat or liberal moderators so that there's a balance in your content moderators?
We also consult with a number of outside groups whenever we develop new policies to make sure that we're taking into account all perspectives.
What are some of those outside groups that would be conservative leaning?
Congressman, I need to get back to you with a list of specific groups, but it would depend on what the topic is.
Can you just think of one? I mean, you said you reach out to outside groups. Can you think of one conservative outside group that you reach out to and use as a content moderator?
Congressman, I'm talking about different external stakeholders and groups that are inputs to our policy development process.
What is a digital land grab?
Congressman, I'm not sure what you're referring to.
Well, in the emails that your company produced to the committee, there's one from David Weiner in 2014 where he's describing under the mergers and acquisitions advice within the company that you need to engage in a land grab. And he says, I hate the word land grab, but I think that's the best convincing argument, and we should own that.
And I think he was discussing the fact that as mobile phones were growing in popularity, there were a lot of new ways that people could connect and communicate that were part of this overall broader space and market around human connection and helping people stay connected and share their experiences.
Okay, well, Mr. Zuckerberg, it seems to be both internal and external, because then in an email from you in 2012, we see a similar sentiment expressed. You write, we can likely always just buy any competitive startups. So is your desire to limit competition by purchasing your competitors consistent with the message to your investors that the way you'll run your company is through digital land grabs?
Congressman, I'm not authorization of how we communicated with investors, but
it's your words, Mr. Zuckerberg.
But I think the broader point is that there were a lot of new ways that people can connect that were created by smartphones.
But this is about your merger and acquisition strategy. You went on to say one thing about startups is you can often acquire them. So, I mean, I'm not interested in how people connect. I'm interested in how you acquire businesses to limit competition. Why did you fire Palmer Luckey?
Congressman, I'm not sure it's appropriate to get into a specific personnel issue publicly.
I mean, I could just tell you that
I can
Palmer
assure you
Luckey's
that it was
NDA
not.
with you, I only have 10 seconds, but Palmer Luckey's NDA with you doesn't allow him to talk to anyone except government officials. I'm a government official. I've seen the messages where you have specifically directed Mr. Luckey to make statements regarding his politics for the benefit of your company. So I think both in the case of these content moderators and in the case of the testimony you just gave regarding Mr. Luckey and firing people over their politics, there is serious question as to whether or not you're giving truthful testimony here or whether it's lying before Congress. I see my time's expired and I'll yield back.
The forefathers of this country narrowly foresaw the technocracy and its willing subjects that now wield a stranglehold on the ideals countless legions shed blood, sweat, and tears for. A monumental effort to realize true permanent individual freedom, only to be sacrificed for the temporary fortunes of the lords of Silicon Valley, ignited on the pyre of the New World Order. John Bowne reporting.